good evening, or I guess late afternoon to some of you. Welcome to tonight's event hosted by the Society of American Archivists student chapter at San Jose State University. I'm thrilled to introduce our esteemed speaker, Mary Jo Russell. Mary Jo is a dedicated professional with extensive experience as a medical resource librarian and resident archivist at the Vassar Brothers Medical Center in New York. Her expertise in creating and maintaining archives in a regional medical center is unparalleled. During tonight's presentation, Mary Jo will share insights from her journey, focusing on the process of creating, editing, and publishing a history of the hospital. As a solo medical librarian, she has navigated various challenges and successes, and tonight she graciously offers to share her valuable lessons with us. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that this event will be recorded, so please keep your microphones muted. Questions can be submitted via the chat, and we'll have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of Mary Jo's presentation. Without further ado, let's give a warm virtual welcome to Mary Jo Russell.
Well, thank you very much. This is really exciting for me to be able to share a passion of mine with all of you, and that is history. And that might seem kind of strange coming from someone who is a medical librarian working in the medical field, but history has always been my first love. So if we could bring up the PowerPoint, that would be great, and I'll get started.
Let me go ahead and get that going. Make sure you can see it, and then I'll go ahead and mute myself.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, and thank you, Missy. She's going to be advancing the slides as we go along. So obviously, we're starting out here looking at putting pieces together, and that's what happens when you start up a new archives, which is what I did when I first started at Vassar. There was not an archives; nothing existed there. So I'll talk a little bit about that journey. But back in October, I presented my experience with publishing a history of the medical center at our annual medical library conference here in New York. And afterwards, I had the pleasure of meeting Phoebe and talking with her about the archives. And that led to a conversation which led to this invitation to speak to you all today. So thank you so much. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background, as I said, history is my first love. And if you look closely at this photograph here, you will see 4 people. And the person standing on the left, that gentleman, happened to be my grandfather. And so even as a kid, I always loved history, and I loved to talk to him about what it was like to work in a grocery store in the 1920s. And this is a picture of him standing in that grocery store, which he eventually took over as the owner and manager and worked in the store for many years. And I love this picture not only because it has my grandfather in it, but it also gives you a peek inside a grocery store in the 1920s. And they sold everything, even cookies. It's really pretty neat. Not only what's inside these photos is what is interesting, but I actually had a student archival experience myself. And that is in my undergraduate studies, I ended up getting a work study program, which helped me pay for my tuition. And I was assigned to the archives of the college, which was fantastic experience. And I was the archives assistant for 4 years. And that experience led me to choose library science for my master's degree because I wanted to become an archivist. And my career path actually led me to a full-time job as a hospital librarian instead, but history has always remained my first love. So how can I possibly incorporate that type of historical curiosity into my present job? Next slide, please. So how did this all get started? In 2004, I received a call from the administration office asking me to meet with the CEO. He asked me if I would be willing to take on the responsibility of gathering together and keeping safe the history of the hospital. And he also gave me, from the administration budget, $5,000 for startup costs. So back in 2004, that was a really nice sum of money to start an archives. So I literally jumped at the opportunity. I was so excited. But I needed to define the scope of the collection, so I made a decision from the start to focus only on items that would tell the story of the hospital. So I didn't get involved in the history of the city of Poughkeepsie, where the hospital resides, or any other area, but I focused strictly on the history of the hospital. So anything that I found outside of that scope, I donated to the local historical society. And the very first acquisition from the archives was a silver tea set, which was given to the hospital in 1952 by a family with a long history of giving monetary donations to the hospital. It was wrapped in felt and packed away in several boxes. And when I opened the boxes and unwrapped this tea set, I realized it was much older than 1952. And I started researching tea sets, which led to the conclusion that this set was most likely manufactured in the early 1800s. So we very carefully wrapped this back up, and it's brought out on special occasions. Next slide, please. Setting up the archives was something that I really needed to do from the start. And anything that was originally found was stored in my office, and that wasn't going to be the best of situations going forward. So before I could continue collecting anything more, I needed some way to store everything properly. And at that time, the radiology department was getting rid of their mobile shelving storage units. And I was offered one of those units, and it has been absolutely perfect for the archives, for the storage of all the different boxes and the memorabilia. And I also made sure that when I started purchasing all these boxes, that I purchased them with a coating on the outside. And there's two different types of boxes. There's just the plain paper ones, and then the ones that are coated. And the reason why I bought the coated ones is because running through the storage room right above this mobile shelving unit is the piping for the sprinkler system for the first floor of the hospital. So I didn't want any water damage. So I made sure that we tried to keep this as safe as possible. Thankfully, that's never happened, but just to be safe. And although I can't control the heat or the humidity within the storage room where this mobile shelving unit is installed, the room pretty much stays at around 70 degrees, and the humidity stays pretty much at 50%, which is really not bad for an archives. So everything is organized by subject and in broad subject categories. However, as more and more of the items have been acquired, I've had to do a lot of shifting around. So rather than create any permanent labels on the shelves, I use a lot of Post-it notes, and it's still a work in progress. So even though I've been doing this for a while, I still find that the Post-it notes work the best. Next slide, please. So the fun part of this, starting up this archives, was finding everything and looking in closets and basements. They were literally in the old hospital space in the basement. There were catacombs, there were boxes, and all kinds of stuff that we found and pulled out. And in one of the boxes that we discovered in the administration closet had a number of photographs that had been given to one of the former CEOs. And when we dug through the photographs, in the bottom of the box was this photo. And this is actually the only photo we have of the original hospital that was built along the Hudson River. And it was built in 1887. And so this is the oldest photo we have. We believe it was probably taken right after it was built, because there aren't any trees. It doesn't even look like there's any grass growing. So it looks like this photograph was taken soon after it was built. And so we had this treasure trove of items all over the place we didn't even know we had until I started doing the collection and bringing them into the archives and creating a proper home for them. Next slide, please. This is my favorite photo. And this is a group of nurses. This photo was taken in 1893. They are sitting in a parlor. And you can see the photo on the left. If you look really closely across the bottom of the photo, you'll see water damage, staining that you can see. And then in the nurse that's standing in the upper left, you'll see that she has some black stains on her, and that is actual real mold. This photograph was found in a paper bag that was probably stored in someone's basement. And on the back of the photo, very faintly written, were the names of all the nurses on the front of the photo. And it took some time to decipher the writing. And based on the names and on a list of nurses we had from 1898, we were able to date this photograph to 1893. I then had the privilege to contract with a preservation specialist who works for the New York City Metropolitan Museum of Art. And he and his team were able to clean this photo and really bring it back to life. The water stains were reduced, the mold was removed, and then his team created a digital version, which is what you see on the right. And that we were able to put on display. And as you can see, there's no visible staining or mold or anything. They did a phenomenal job of restoring this for us so that we could digitize it and have it on display. So when something like this is acquired, it is worth the expense, I think, to create a digital version that can be shared publicly, especially when the subject matter is of historical interest like this photo. And a close look at the image reveals that the nurse seated at the far left has a black ribbon on her cap. And this tells us that she was the head nurse. So next slide, please. So that was my favorite photo. This is everyone else's favorite photo. And this is our surgery team in 1913. So the photo on the left was the photo that I first found in my search for all different things throughout the hospital, and had no idea the second photo even existed. And it was several years later when we found the second photo, which shows the team turning back to continue their surgery while the photographer took the picture. And the operating room, we can see, was lighted by a window, which is on the left, and by gas lighting hanging from the ceiling. And the room itself had tiled walls and a tile floor. Interesting things about this photo too is that you'll see that everyone is wearing black gloves, and these black gloves would be washed after the surgery and hung outside on a line to dry, and then they would bring them back in and put them back on for the next surgery. And notice also that no one is wearing a mask, and that is because masks were not worn in surgery until the 1920s. Next slide, please. This is a doctor's bag. This would have been carried around by a physician when he visited people in their homes. So you can see the various instruments that he would have carried in this bag. It opened up and it had two different sections. One section was for instruments. The other section was, you see all those little bottles lined up? Those are actual real medications and pills that he would have used. And then there were bottles with different types of liquids in, which he would have drawn up into a syringe, and he would have given shots from those bottles. We actually found a set of knives, very little knives in there, and also a set of needles. So this is something that had to be handled very, very carefully because of what was inside. And fortunately, his name was written on the inside of this so that we knew that it belonged to Dr. Scott Lord Smith. And he practiced from the 1910s through the 1940s in the city of Poughkeepsie area. Very interestingly, we discovered that he also was a physician to Sarah Delano Roosevelt, who was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's mother. And he had a couple of letters that we have found where he had interacted with the manager of her estate. And so we know that he had an interaction with her, and also a letter that he wrote to Franklin Delano Roosevelt about his concern about the cleanliness of the Hudson River. So even back in the day, they were thinking very environmentally. And although this is a fascinating item to open up and look through, it also is very delicate to handle because of the condition of the leather. It is actually deteriorating, so we have to be very careful. This doctor's bag was donated by two sisters who found it in their barn. We have no idea how it got there, but we're very grateful to them for donating such an interesting object to us. So whenever we take this out of the archives to show, we actually have to lay out a sheet or something to protect the tabletop. We use gloves and we open it up and very carefully. Next slide, please. This wheelchair I discovered in a locked closet in an unused section of the hospital. It was in horrible shape. The picture doesn't even do it justice as to how bad it was. There was stuff piled on top of it. The seat was broken. It was a real mess. And so I was able to contract with a furniture restoration expert. And I had him bring it back to its original condition. He even redid the caning. It came out beautifully. It is now on display in our lobby, and I was able to date this wheelchair to probably 1890. The reason why we know it's not newer than 1900 is because wheelchairs after 1900 actually had a metal ring on the outside of the wheels for the patients to wheel themselves around. This one has a wooden ring on both sides, and so we know that dates it to prior to 1900. Next slide, please. We have original Board of Trustees ledgers and an original hospital accounting ledger, and these are dated 1882 to 1894. Now, the hospital didn't open until 1887, but in 1882, we see the first discussion amongst a group of people about establishing the hospital. And from there, they did the incorporation in 1884. They spent 3 years building the hospital, and it opened in 1887. These are very interesting reads. The first thing about these is that you have to get used to reading the script handwriting of the late 1800s. So it takes a little bit of getting used to see how they made their letters. So you have to decipher that. The interesting thing about the accounting ledger is this is something that was not in our possession originally because it was found in the wall of a house being torn down in the city of Poughkeepsie. What we think happened is that this house belonged to a banker, and the banker had records that showed that he had various meetings in the conference room of the bank. And one of those meetings was the Board of Trustees for Vassar Brothers Hospital. So we can only assume that not only was he the banker in the city of Poughkeepsie, but he also probably was their original treasurer. And that's why he ended up holding on to this. But when the demolition team came in and tore the building apart, one of the people on the team was actually moonlighting. He was also a security officer at the hospital. And when he saw this, he recognized it for what it was and brought it to me. So we are very, very grateful that he recognized it for its historical value because it contains so much really neat information about the cost of things back in 1887. So it's really been a treasure trove of information for us. Next slide, please. So for starting thinking about a history of the hospital, I decided that since I'm a very visual person, that I would create a timeline. And what I did was I got these huge sheets of Post-it note tear-off pages, and I put them across the wall of the storage room. And I then downloaded a timeline that had been built for our centennial celebration in 1987. And then I added some more dates to it, and I began to collect all the photos that I could. I basically photocopied the photos, and these are all just copies up on the wall. And I made those copies of those photographs. I taped them up on the timeline. It was a very hands-on project, and it was a great way for me to visually see how I could put together the hospital history. I did not do this alone. I had the privilege for several years of being able to partner with the history department of a local college. And I had history students each semester come in and help with digitization of hundreds of photographs. We created metadata for each photo. We organized a lot of papers, and they worked with me on this timeline, and we had a lot of fun doing it. And all of the digital content can be found on the New York Heritage website, and I have included the URL. So if you'd like to take a look at that, you're welcome to. And I have to really give a lot of credit to these students who did a lot of work, and we had a lot of fun. Next slide, please. Vassar Brothers Hospital also had a School of Nursing. The School of Nursing began in 1890 when 2 nurses were given certificates for patient care from the medical staff. They issued the certificates initially, and that school existed from 1890 until 1972. And the Alumni Association of the School of Nursing asked me if I would collect their information and put it in the archives at the hospital, mainly for safekeeping, but also because where all of their memorabilia was being stored was in the basement of a building that was having a lot of water issues. And so I said, absolutely, we'd be more than happy to bring that collection out of that basement and bring it over to the archives. And this led to another huge task of organizing and digitization. And this was once again an opportunity for a student to work with me. And this very helpful student who really got into the whole School of Nursing and the history and the photos and everything. She actually spent 2 semesters with me working on this because she was having such an interesting time doing it, and she was learning so much. So I hope you're picking up on this, because as students, you're very, very helpful if you can partner with an archivist and help them with these projects, because it's just not something that we can always get to every day, especially like me with my day job being a medical librarian. So it's always very helpful to partner with students. So in honor of the school's 50th reunion of the class of 1972, which was the last class to graduate, I wrote a history of the School of Nursing. It is a printout of about 40 pages, and you can see a picture here of it. And I put it into just a report cover. I didn't have it bound or anything. And then I passed it out at the reunion, and the nurses just loved it. I am still getting requests for copies, which I gladly mail out for free to any of the nursing alumni from the school. Interesting to note that the Alumni Association retains the copyright. So anything that they owned that we house in the archives, it's copyrighted from the Alumni Association. So when I need to use something of theirs, I always ask their permission, which they very gladly give, but it is a separate collection from the hospital history. Next slide, please. We were able to put 2 display cases into our main lobby, and we have a 1955 nurse's uniform in one of the cases and a set of items from our School of Nursing in the other case. And I don't know why that's sideways, but it is. It is always great to be able to share these items and not have them stay hidden away in the archives. Both of these cases lock, and only I have the key, so everything stays safe. I would suggest that if you're involved in putting things out for the public, that you do have lockable cases, not only for keeping everything dust-free, but also for keeping them free from sticky fingers. Next slide, please. So writing a hospital history. First of all, I wanted to do something a little bit different than what they did for the centennial, and that was a booklet called Lifetimes. And that was basically a public relations piece. It was meant to be passed out at the centennial. And it's very nicely done, but it's not really a strict history of the hospital. It's more of a commentary of the hospital's changes over the years. I wanted to target the audience as anyone interested in the factual history of the hospital. So it was actually a huge undertaking, which I didn't realize when I started that it was going to take 7 years from start to finish. But I decided that because I wanted to keep this factual and as chronological as possible, I really spent a lot of time working on that aspect of it. I took over the extra desk in my office as a workspace for this project, and that way I could work on it whenever I had the time. The first draft was only 17 pages, and I thought, oh, that should be enough. But the more I dug into the archives and the more I realized that this was going to be much more extensive than 17 pages. The first draft actually quickly expanded to over 30 pages as I started to check on the various facts and started to choose images to go into it. And even though the photos are housed in the archives and we are the keepers of all of these photographs, we don't always have the copyright. So if any of the photos had a photographer stamp on the back, those I tried to avoid using. And I just stuck with the photos that we had that were either taken by our public relations department or even those taken by myself in the past 30 years that I've been there. And that way we own the copyright and there wouldn't be any issue about that. I did include 2 pictures in the history that were taken by a construction company because I wanted to include those construction photos. And I just contacted them by email and asked for their permission. And they wrote back and said, absolutely, you can use them just as long as you put our company name underneath each photo as a caption, which I gladly did. Next slide, please. So it was actually a bit of work to get to the final project. By the time I reached draft 8, the book was 66 pages. And the reason why I kept doing different drafts is because I was reworking so much and it would get to be such a mess that I would open up a new Word document, pull over everything that I wanted to keep and keep working on it. So I finally got to draft 8, and that's the one I decided was the most thorough and the one that I had fact-checked the most. But still, I hired a professional editor to review the transcript. And this was really essential because we spent several weeks going back and forth on various edits and composition, even to the point of punctuation corrections, a lot of things that that she picked up on that I never would have picked up on. So it was really beneficial. Then I had to find a graphics designer because when you take something like this to a printer, it has to have all the pages laid out exactly the same, all the margins have to be the same, and all of that. So I sent this to a graphics designer. She took my Word document and converted it into a publisher-ready document. And she and I had to go back and forth a few times. Now, this image here might look a little strange. If you can see in the background, there's an arm and a leg. And that is because the image that she chose to put on the front cover of the history was actually Matthew Vassar Sr., the uncle, and the 2 brothers who established Vassar Brothers Hospital were John Guy and Matthew. So she had put the uncle's picture on the front cover instead of the brothers' pictures on the front cover. So I cut out pictures to them. I spliced them in there. I highlighted it and I sent it back to her. And I said, oh, we need the 2 brothers, not the uncle. Because I think, can you imagine if we publish a history of Vassar Brothers Medical Center and on the front cover is the uncle and not the brothers? So it was kind of funny. We both had a laugh about it. But one thing about graphic editors or designers is that they're not in editing any content. They're not editors. They if they see a mistake, she would come back to me and say, is this a mistake or is this okay? But she was not going to do any changes. So by the time it gets to the point of going to a graphics designer, it really does need to be the final version. And then I had to move on to working with a printer. And I found out that working with a printer, there were 7 different kinds of paper and 5 different kinds of bindings. So who knew that was going to be another step in the decision-making process. But once we determined what we thought would be the best, the printer actually very graciously did a mock-up for me so I could see exactly what it would look like and let me review and approve that before they went to actual production. Next slide, please. So here are some lessons learned. Some of the pieces to put together for something like this. The first is to not underestimate the time factor. Writing and publishing a history taught me many things, including patience, lots of patience. I would get eager and think that I was done, and I would find something else, and then I would get interrupted with my regular job for days at a time, and then finally get back around to it. So the final version really did take a year and a half to complete. And then the laptop that I was using to do all of this, to create the Word documents, to scan and save all the photos, it crashed and the hard drive was not recoverable. Fortunately, a week before, I had downloaded all the image files onto a separate drive, and I had a draft saved on a different computer. So that was a close call, literally. Then having a really good editor is worth every dollar you pay them, because they are just amazing at helping you construct everything together. I learned that very quickly. And then I had to get over the fear that there might be a mistake. I wanted it to be perfect, but it's not a perfect world. And so I had to finally decide, even if I can't see it right now, when it gets published, there's probably going to be a mistake. And sure enough, I misspelled somebody's name, and I mistakenly put in something about one of the buildings that was not quite right. Although I have to say, it was not 100% my fault. The person that I had interviewed didn't give me the full picture when I interviewed him about the particular building. And so after it was published, I found out that it was not quite exactly accurate. So there is now a corrections page that I print out and I put in the back of every book as I pass them out. Next slide, please. So was it worth the effort? Absolutely. And here it is, A Vision Born, A History of Vassar Brothers Medical Center, 1887 to 2021. And I chose 2021 because in January of 2021, our hospital built a huge 8-story addition. And I decided at that point, I would let the next historian write the next chapter of the history. So here it is, and it was finally done and published in December of 2021. Next slide. And this is the last slide. Thank you so much for listening to all of this. I hope this has been informative, and it's maybe taking a look at something you might not have thought about, and that is an archives inside a medical center. So we can stop sharing the screen, and I'd be happy to take any questions or any comments.
Thank you so much. So yeah, we are going to open up for Q&A now. So if anyone wants to come off mute to ask a question or put them in the chat, we can either read them out loud or let you know if we have any. That would be, oh, we do have one from Rebecca.
Well, I see there's a question in the chat if I deal with restricted materials in the archives. I do not handle any patient information in the archives, so we don't have any restricted materials. And all of the, I hope that answers the question. And all of the digital content is now up on the New York Heritage website. I work with a local library council, which has a digital librarian expert on staff, and she is extremely helpful in making sure that we get all the right information and we have it all set up in the right way, and then we upload it to New York Heritage website. All of the digital content is stored in 2 different locations. I have one on an external drive, and I also have a backup drive that the hospital provides for all of us. And then also I am uploading all of the photo image files to a digital dark archive, which is managed by the Library Council as well. So it's a partnership with the local Library Council.
Looks like we have a question from Alexandra, if you want to come off mute.
Sure. Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for this presentation. Everything was super interesting. And you mentioned early on some of those items were donated, like the doctor's bag and the accounting ledger. do you have a call out for people to donate items? How do you kind of get the word out about anybody who may have some items related to the hospital, whether it's, former patients or family members of patients, stuff like that?
Yes, I used to have my virtual library website was on the cloud, and that way anybody could get to it. And then I just put the resources and the licensed resources uh, uh, under username and password. My virtual library, unfortunately, no longer resides on the cloud, so I don't have a way to openly do that anymore. So what I've done is I've worked with our public relations department, and they have a link directly to the page on my website that talks about the hospital history, and in that I have my contact information. And so the public relations department, they're the ones that put that out there. So any kind of requests or donations comes through them first and then to me.
Awesome. Thank you.
We have a question from Hope that says, did you feel prepared to take this grand project on? And did you feel totally sure and confident when you accepted this job?
To take on the project of the hospital history, that was totally me. To be honest, I decided to do it because I realized that I was probably the one with the most intellectual understanding of the history of the hospital, since I had built the archives. And so I'm going to be approaching my 34th year at Vassar Brothers as the medical librarian. And so I thought, well, if anybody is going to do this, I'm going to have to do this. So I worked on it basically on whatever free time I would have. And so that's why it took so long for me to put it together. But I basically decided to do this on my own. But I did reach out to administration and let them know that I was doing it. And I also reached out to public relations department, let them know I was doing it. And everybody was super supportive at any level.
Phoebe says, when you're looking to get items restored, do you shop around, and are you given a specific budget for restoration?
And what I have as a budget for the archives overall, I usually put in about $3,000 a year for any type of restoration projects that we might have. And those just have to get approved by administration. I just let them know what I'm doing, and then they sign off on it. When I'm looking for a restoration person, I usually have to shop around and ask around my network. I ask through the Library Council. I'm also part of a special interest group through the Library Council with archivists in the area. And I have the advantage of living in the Hudson Valley, where we have a lot of historical places, including the FDR museum and library and other historical homes. So there's a lot of archivists in the area, and we get together once every few months and we talk shop, and they always have great ideas. They always know a lot of people. So there's a lot of networking that I do. And so with the furniture restoration, that was someone that I picked up through actually West Point Museum. It was a person who had done some restoration work for the West Point Museum, and I was able to get in touch with him and have that done. So it's basically networking.
So getting really in the weeds, in the doctor's bag, there was some pills or something. What were those labels? I was like, I want to get a close up on that. What was inside any of those bottles?
Oh, what's inside? What are those? Oh, well, there's some rather interesting things. There's morphine and phenobarbital. There was a medication that I had to look up. I had no idea what it was. It turned out it was for epilepsy. He also had a little bottle that when I opened it up, I realized it was some kind of anesthesia that he would have actually put on a cotton ball and put it over the patient's nose to anesthetize them if he had to do some kind of procedure. So when you start to look at all these things, you realize that we're very glad we're in the age we're in when it comes to medicine.
Thank you. That is cool.
So it's not only building the archives and writing the history, but it's also doing all this detective work to figure out dates or objects or any of this. There's a lot of detective work involved. And my students who helped me out were great at researching everything on Google, which Google Images, there's a lot, it's amazing what we could find. We really got excited about different things when we dug into the research. We also use family search when we're looking at names or physicians or trying to determine timeframes. So we use a number of different sources.
Piggybacking a little bit off of Carolyn's question, but when you're dealing with like medical things like the doctor bag, are you worried about getting into anything that could be harmful, or because you're digging into things that I could have deteriorated over time or have like a shelf life that you're going through? I mean, what do you do if you come across something that could potentially bring harm to you or your team?
Right. But in the case of the doctor's bag, I actually bought a special box for that from Gaylord, which is a company that provides archival materials. I looked up on their website. I actually ended up calling them and asking them what specifically I could use to store this leather bag so it wouldn't continue to deteriorate. And it was a matter of two different things. One is wrapping the leather in a special archival paper so it wouldn't continue to deteriorate, and then putting into a special box that I purchased through Gaylord. It's just those kinds of things have to be handled separately. For everything else, I can just buy regular boxes, regular archival boxes and archival folders and label them and put them in. But something like that, I have to go onto the Gaylord website and actually look and see what they have, or even call the company in the case of this particular item. The nursing uniforms that I have and some of the nurses' capes, which are wool, those we have to especially cover those, and we have a metal cabinet that we keep them all in, and that is secured. So it has like a double layer of protection. So textiles are a little difficult to deal with. I don't like to have too many of those because they're delicate to handle. How much?
Go ahead.
There's a question about how much space. I have as much space as the storage room behind my library. That's the extent of my space. And so the mobile shelving unit actually it's 12 sections, and right now that seems to be sufficient. I still have 2 more sections I haven't used, so we can expand, but the extent of my space is literally that storage room.
So just thinking about the limited amount of storage, as you were going through the materials, were the things that you turned away, decide actually this doesn't really fit, or just items you removed or weeded or deaccessioned?
Right. Yes, that goes into it as well. We received a donation of a number of items that actually didn't come from the hospital at all. We found out that the physician that had used those items was actually a physician that worked with the City of Poughkeepsie School District. And I contacted the Dutchess County Historical Society and asked them if they would be interested in the entire collection intact, and they said yes. So we passed that along to them. Another item that was donated to us was a Civil War surgeon's kit, which was absolutely fascinating. I should have just kept it, but it wasn't. Vassar didn't open until 1887, so way past the Civil War. So I ended up donating that to a local historical reenactment group, and they were absolutely thrilled with it. And in fact, they set up a special presentation in the local library using this Civil War surgeon's kit, and they put it out there, and they invited me to hear it as well. And it was a fascinating presentation, and it was done by a man who does Civil War reenactments, and he reenacts as a surgeon in the Civil War. And he was so happy to receive this kit and to be able to not only carefully preserve it, but he also uses it and demonstrates all the different items that are inside of it. So it's really neat to see that history is continuing. So things like that, I try to find the best partner for that. And I don't keep those items. There was a lot of papers from the School of Nursing office from the when it closed in 1972. They stuffed everything in boxes. A lot of memos and things that were just not even something we would keep. So we kept only what we thought was of historical value. And I partnered very closely with the School of Nursing alumni as we went through all of that to say, okay, this is what we're keeping. This is what we don't need to keep. So yeah, we do sometimes pass things along or just deaccession them.
That's great, because I feel like there's always sort of I think maybe for newer people with less experience, or at least myself, like, oh, what if I get rid of this? Then it has historical significance, down the line, or somebody else found it valuable. But
yeah. I don't tend to throw things away. I just tend to find new homes for them. But some of the stuff we can safely toss out. There were some photographs that I found that were in such bad shape, no identification, had no clue what they were. We safely toss those away. It's a decision-making process, but I don't make those decisions on my own. I either consult with another archivist or I'll check with the library council, the digitization librarian at the library council. She's been very, very helpful in some of those. I've actually taken a box of things over to her and sat with her, and we've gone through them to look through to see, yeah, we can say this, or no, we can definitely safely throw that away. So yeah. It's good to network and consult.
As a solo archivist, did you feel like you had to answer any questions or to like your process, or you had people kind of stepping in and wondering what, I don't know, did you enjoy doing it alone or being by yourself, or did you like it better when you had somebody with you because you could kind of do it together?
Sorry, I think I'm not quite catching your question there. I think there's a little bit of a cutout.
I'm sorry, my dogs keep barking. I was saying, so when you were working by yourself versus when you were working with a partner, how was it doing both? Did you like one versus the other? Were there pros and cons to either?
The only partners I've ever had working with me in the archives are the students from the local college, and they were just so eager to learn. It was a really fun partnership, and I found myself not only excited about what they were learning, but also what I was learning through what they were finding out as well. So it was like we were detectives together on some of these projects. And so that was energizing for me. Unfortunately, in 2020, that relationship didn't get restored after the pandemic because the professor who was working with me retired, and I tried to reach out to the college again, but just couldn't make the connection again. But yeah, when it comes to doing something like this, I think whenever we have an opportunity to work together, the collaboration to me is better than working alone. But as a solo librarian, I've learned over the years about working alone and what that's all like, but I do a lot of networking. So that always helps me out.
So I was checking out some of the collections on the New York Heritage Digital site. And I noticed, some of the written documentations. Did you do any sort of transcriptions, or is that something that would you potentially have students do if you were able to restore that connection? Or what are your thoughts about like transcribing some of those older documents?
Oh, okay. When I first started this, I actually had an intern working with me, and she is the one who started our digital collection for New York Heritage. And the intern was with me for a summer. So we had an entire 4 months of working together and really putting it all together. And she laid out the parameters and the metadata and everything and got us started. And then the students, when they came in, I would just show each one of them how to scan the photographs and put them in, and how to attach the metadata and what each field meant. And so that was how we started. Basically, it was called Content DM, which was a platform that we used for the digital content. And now we've moved on to a different platform, but I work with a library council on that. And basically, whenever I scan and upload, it's not uploaded directly to New York Heritage. It's uploaded into this software first, and then it is basically proofread and scanned to make sure that it's of the right quality. And then it's batch uploaded onto New York Heritage. So it's not a direct upload. And that's where I partner with a digital librarian at the Library Council to do that. And across New York State, we have that advantage. There are library councils across New York State, and each one of them, they do the same thing. They have different librarians who work with the libraries and archives to be able to do this, and then it's all uploaded to New York Heritage. I don't know if other states have that, but it's definitely something that's really neat, because anybody can go onto New York Heritage and see all different kinds of collections from all different sources. So it's a great primary history resource. It's also used in the schools to teach the kids about New York State history.
Phoebe was wondering, how do you get to partner with New York Heritage Digital Collections?
Well, I didn't partner with them directly. Like I said, I partnered with the Library Council. The Library Councils chose to do this. This was a decision at the state library level. They decided to create this New York Heritage thing, and then they did it through the Library Council. So I didn't have to partner directly with New York Heritage. I just partnered with my local Library Council to do it. It's just the structure, the way New York State set it up.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from anybody? I know we're getting close to the end of our hour.
But at the last slide of the slide deck is my contact information. If any of you have any questions or any follow-up or anything else, please feel free to reach out to me.
Put it back up just so that we have it too.
And it's actually pretty easy to remember my email address. It's the hospital's name, which is Vassar Brothers Medical Center. So it's vbmclibrary@gmail.com. So you don't even have to remember my name. Just remember vbmclibrary@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary Jo. This was wonderful.
Oh, you're welcome. This has been such a pleasure. I hope this has been interesting to everyone.
So
and
interesting.
It certainly is very near and dear to my heart.
Thank you so much. You did an excellent job, and it was wonderful, all the things that you got to share with us. Thank you for coming in and staying
you're
up
very
late.
welcome.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Have a great evening, everyone.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.